Everyone knew the opening event of this year's South African Off-Road Championship was going to be heavily influenced by more than 300 millimetres of rain in the Northwest Province prior to the Sun City 400 last weekend. No one could anticipate just how difficult the conditions were going to prove. Former SA champion Bux Carolyn, in the first car away, had an inkling of what was to come.
It's rained a lot here, and I think we're going to battle out there. The four-wheel drives, if it is wet out there, have got a slight advantage on us. But the guy in front's got the biggest problem, because if he gets bogged down, the whole field's going to get stuck. So it's going to be a long day.
Prophetic words, but Castrol Toyota star Richard Leek was a little more confident.
Chassis good in the mud, the vehicle's good in the mud, and I think we'll settle down, have a steady run, make sure we keep all the other production vehicles behind us.
Regular off-road stalwart Linton Draper sat this one out, and at the end of the day must have been jolly glad he was a spectator. With competitors scheduled to complete 2 laps of a 196-kilometre course, conditions in the early stages were almost perfect for off-road racing. Dust and mud are the 2 worst enemies where off-roaders are concerned. There was no dust as the early front-runners jockeyed for positions, and so far there was no sign of the sort of muddy conditions that can quickly turn races into something of a lottery. Former special vehicle champions Herman and Karl-Heinz Sulwalt in the Sulwalt Transport Raceco were chasing after Bux Carolyn and Kenny Scholthammer in a Raceco borrowed for the Sun City race from JJ Volmerans. Not far behind the Sulwalts were another pair of former South African champions in Richard Schilling and Ashley Thorne in the Motortech Raceco. Stan Illman and Franz Stangl in the Shell Carrera Motors Raceco were just ahead of the father and son crew of Franz Czepek Sr. and Jr., who are this year campaigning the V-Motors Raceco in Class B in the special vehicle category. The first of the single-seaters in the early stages was Richard Carolyn, elder brother of Bux, in the lubrication equipment Raceco. Hot on his heels was Harry Roscoe, known to his friends as Rocket, in the Protea Playing Cards Raceco. Reigning South African production vehicle champions Avi Reiniker and Robin Houghton in the Bankfin Toyota Land Cruiser were running second to Springboks Cassie Coetzee and Richard Leek in the Castrol Toyota Hilux. It was smooth sailing so far for the Toyota Land Cruiser, with Henry Witham-Lloyd and Riaan van der Walt also going along well. With nothing untoward where the conditions were concerned, most of the competitors made it through the first control point without any problems. Rob Walk and Greg Wiebel in the Superpave car were also going along steadily, but the conditions were starting to get tougher. In the quad racer category, reigning South African champion Wikus van Deventer was also anticipating a long day on the road.
Ek gaan my bes probeer. Dit is die eerste reis van die jaar. Ek het 'n nuwe groot borg gekry. Ek gaan maar net my bes probeer. Dit is baie nat. Dis harde werk uit. Ons kyk maar wat gebeur die einde van die dag.
Wikus van Deventer has dominated the fast-growing quad category over the last 2 seasons, but the likes of Evan Hutchinson and Christo van der Merwe were looking for good results in the standard quad class. The motorcycle brigade were also waiting to get underway, with another huge entry from the two-wheelers. After dominating motorcycle off-road racing for nearly a decade, Alfie Cox was back in South Africa after a year campaigning in Europe.
We don't know how deep the rivers are and everything, but I think the main thing is not to have a problem, try not to drown the bike, because the Sun City area, there's a hell of a lot of rain here, and you know, today I think just to keep going and not get stuck in the mud and just try and keep a pace all day, and I think end of the day you should come out not try and fall down or something, like get full of mud and keep all the controls moving, and I think end of the day it could work out.
Depending where you were out on the circuit, you either had to contend with driving rain or intense humidity. Where rain fell over the course, roads were quickly transformed into slippery tracks that made matters tricky for everyone. Some good tussles were starting to develop among the quad racers, with these four-wheeled motorized bucking Broncos a handful under any circumstances. The slippery conditions made matters even more difficult, with the bike brigade soon in among the quad racer backmarkers. One moment, it was raining in certain areas of the course, and the next, the sun was shining, with firm road surfaces making for good progress. At the back of the production vehicle category, Springboks, Cassie Coetzee and Richard Leek were flying in the Castrol Toyota Hilux after an electrical fault 30 kilometers from the start cost them almost an hour. To nobody's surprise, Alfie Cox on the Panasonic KTM running in the 500 class was at the head of the motorcycle field. The Italian had simply picked up where he left off a year ago and was ahead of teammate Darrell Curtis on the second Panasonic Pro Action KTM, who was leading the 250 category. Third on the road in the bike category was Errol Dalton on the Lesotho Office Equipment Honda, with Cox, Curtis and Dalton pulling away from the rest of the field. Former 200 champion Richard Manning on the dealer team Yamaha was going flat out for class honours. Manning spent most of last season concentrating on enduro events and was hard pushed to stay in touch with the leading trio. Alex Vowles on the Antelex Dairy KTM was fifth on the road and second to Curtis in the 250 category and going well after moving up from the 200 class. The motorcycle frontrunners had rapidly overhauled the quad racer backmarkers, with Wayne Farmer about to catch and pass Skulkberger on one of the Yamaha blasters. With the bikers rapidly approaching a refuel point, Brian Bontekoning on a Yamaha was trying to make up time on the leaders. Not far behind him, Gaborone-based rider Jason Collington on another Yamaha was having a good run in conditions far removed from Botswana's desert tracks. Apart from taking on petrol and stretching sore and cramped muscles, the refuel points provide riders and helpers with an opportunity to carry out running repairs. Modern technology produces some wonderful time savers, but the refuel points often offer a contrast between riders who are in and out in a hurry and those who prefer a more relaxed approach. While the bikers were either back on the course or doing their thing at the refuel point, trouble was brewing up ahead. Most of the car field had by now started to encounter conditions that were a nightmare. One by one, production vehicles and special vehicles alike were starting to bog down in a section of the course that was turning into a sea of mud and water. Tow vehicles in tandem had to try and get stranded competitors underway again. Among the victims were production vehicle frontrunners Neil Woolrich and Paul Vermaak in the factory-backed Nissan Sani. It was also no picnic for the bikers, with Darrell Curtis having moved into the lead ahead of Alfie Cox. Stranded car competitors, among them the Chepek father and son team and the Sulwalk brothers, sportingly pitched in to help the bikers. The dreadful conditions at this particular point of the course were also proving something of a handful for Alfie Cox. He lost valuable time trying to get the Panasonic Pro Action KTM fired up again in knee-deep water and slush. Quad leader Vickers van Deventer and the Jojo Tags Yamaha were both covered in layers of mud. But after one or two anxious moments, it was full steam ahead again for the little man from the Northwest Province. It was plain sailing for Errol Dalton on the Lesotho Office Equipment Honda. With Alfie Cox still temporarily hors de combat, Dalton moved into second place behind Darrell Curtis. When Cox finally got going again, with a little help from Franz Chepek Jr., he dropped to third spot behind his teammate and Dalton. With bikers trying to coax unwilling engines into life and car competitors searching for a way through the slush, the event was starting to turn into something of a lottery. Even when matters appeared to be under some sort of control, there were sudden dangers to put a rapid end to forward progress. This sort of scenario, and most of the car field stuck somewhere out on the course, were providing the organisers with a major headache.
Maar ons kan nie weer daarheen nie, nou hoor. Anders moet ons op hierdie pad sit van aan die ander kant af. Ja, dit kan ons doen, ja. Ja, maar dan ry hulle al die pad op die grondpad, reg deur hierso. So. Ek hoor wat sê Tommy, maar dan moet jy hom op 'n manier kontak. Ek gaan kyk wat kan ek doen hier. Okay.
Back at race headquarters, the motorcycle frontrunners had completed their first lap. Pit stops like these are normally quick in and out affairs, but because of the dreadful conditions, the Sun City 400 produced a much different scenario, with the riders being decontrolled for a section of the route, which included the main service area.
A lot of it's not too bad. All the fast roads in there are okay. There's just a couple of deep puddles here and there. But there's one section today where the mud was deep, at least a half a meter deep. And a lot of the cars are stuck there now. they're battling to get out. I think a lot of them are going to stay there the whole afternoon. The bikes, even the bikes battle to the mat.
The Darrell Curtis, Alfie Cox and Errol Dalton trio were separated by only minutes at the end of the first circuit, and this set up a terrific contest over the last lap. While they prepared to resume battle, there were dramatic developments in the car category. The unflappable Richard Carolyn, affectionately known as Obut, had managed to avoid any sort of trouble in the lubrication equipment single-seater. Carolyn had opened up a huge gap over Herman and Karl-Heinz Sulwald in the Sulwald Transport Raceco. Along with the Chepek father and son team, the Sulwalds had lost a huge amount of time extricating themselves from the muddy section that also held up Neil Woolridge and Paul Vermaak in the Nissan Sani. Carolyn led the Sulwalds and the Chepeks by over an hour in the special vehicle category and was well in control of the race. Nearing the end of the first lap, the Woolridge Vermaak Nissan Sani had hours to spare over the remainder of the production vehicle class. The rest of the opposition, along with the brunt of the special vehicles, were well and truly up the creek without a paddle in a sea of mud. A sea of muds were the operative words, and many of the crews had been bogged down for up to 5 hours. Desperate situations call for desperate measures, but after finishing the first lap and learning that he was expected to tackle the same route a second time around, Harry Roscoe decided enough was enough.
Absolute madness out there, absolute chaos. And there's no way people are going to go through there again the second loop. It's impossible, absolutely impossible. I believe I made sure that they were going to put us through the same route, and that they confirmed that we're going to go through the same route again. And there's no ways we can get through. No ways we can get through that same route again. And that's why I'd rather can it there. I don't want to be stuck out there all night in the mud.
When a tractor that tried to pull cars from a flay that had turned into a quagmire also succumbed, frustrated crews commandeered a grader. While the grader went about its work, tired and sore bikers continued to try and complete the second lap. For some reason or other, crew members like Ashley Thorne appeared to be thoroughly fed up.
Right, we were caught by RP and OB in wet stuff. And then we got into this flay at about, I guess at about 8:30, 8:15 this morning. And there's been about 10 kilometers now of just unbelievable mud and more mud. We've been towed out 3 times. I eventually walked with Colin Frankenberg. We walked about 2 k's up the road here, found a tractor. The tractor pulled us to where you've just seen now the grader trying to get us out. My legs are finished. I'm wearing gum boots. I've had a cake of mud. You just can't believe the weight. And I'm absolutely finished. Absolutely close.
Service crews constantly ferried home bikers who had thrown in the towel, while others discussed ways and means of reaching stranded crews.
Yeah. Like they say now.
Maybe the best is to go back from the back side.
If you come
where we went in. We went in
here. The marshal, the last marshal at the road.
You could go in there. Okay. But like some of the oaks have got through almost to the end. But there's a lot.
While mud-covered and exhausted motorcycle backmarkers were still preparing to tackle their second lap, the front-runners were heading for home. Alfie Cox had regained the lead from his Panasonic Pro Action KTM teammate Darrell Curtis, with Errol Dalton a minute or two behind the pair on the Lesotho Office Equipment Honda. It had got to the stage where it was difficult to tell if a rider was on his second lap or still trying to complete the first circuit of a treacherous route. It was much the same scenario in the quad racer category with a high attrition rate. Only 3 quads were destined to be classified as finishers. Although the rate of attrition wasn't as severe in the motorcycle category, bikers were constantly coming up on car crews desperately trying to extricate themselves from frustrating situations. The section where the majority of the cars ended their race was also no cakewalk for the bikers. It was tough going, and when you land up in a ditch full of water and have to manhandle a heavy motorcycle onto what you hope is reasonably dry land, life can appear to be a bit of a bummer. For others, there was a bright side, with friendly locals only too happy to come to the rescue of those who have just gone through a fair bit of trial and tribulation. With the leaders almost home and dry, there was still some good battles going on in the motorcycle category. Wayne Farmer had moved into second place in the 200 class. Farmer had moved ahead of Richard Manning, but trailed class leader Clayton Enslin by around 20 minutes. Manning had about 8 minutes to make up on Farmer, but race distance was running out for the Italian. In the quad category, race leader Vickers van Deventer on the Jojo Tanks Yamaha had opened up a gap of around 3 hours. Christo van der Mavre in second place and JB Berger were the only other quad racers with 3 minutes separating the pair. For anyone still running at this stage of the race, picking up places wasn't as important as simply making it to the finish. Reigning South African 250 champion Graham McLaughlin on the Lesotho Office Equipment Honda wasn't having the best of days. One of off-road racing's characters, McLaughlin was 12th overall and 6th in class, but hadn't lost his sense of humour. A steady run on another Lesotho Office Equipment Honda had taken Grant Bloomfield into 4th place in the 500 class and 13th overall. Malcolm Smith was out of the top 5 in the 200 class on another Honda, but there was plenty of encouragement and advice for the riders from enthusiastic young local residents. At the finish, Alfie Cox was back to his winning ways, but he cut it a little fine. Cox was only 21 seconds ahead of his Panasonic Pro Action teammate Darrell Curtis, with Errol Dalton third on the Lesotho Office Equipment Honda. Cox took the 500 class, Curtis the 250 category, and 5th overall, after a terrific ride gave Clayton Enslin the 200 class honours.
It was a good race and Darrell put up a good show, and I was actually worried at one stage. But all in all, it was a good ride. The second lap, like I say, dried out tremendously, and it was just wide open the whole way. I think we must have taken at least 15 minutes off our second lap.
As expected, Vickers van Deventer dominated the quads. He was nearly 3 hours ahead of Christo van der Mavre and JB Berger, who were the only other finishers. There was a controversial finish to the car category. After a trouble-free run, whilst all those around him floundered in the mud, Richard Carolyn cruised to only his second national championship victory in the lubrication equipment Raceco. The ultra-steady Carolyn was one of only 2 cars to complete the full distance. Despite a late stop to carry out running repairs on the V-Motors Raceco, the Franz Czepek senior and junior team also completed the full distance, but the organisers elected to score the cars up to the end of the first lap. This dropped the unfortunate Czepeks to 3rd overall and 3rd in the special vehicle class, behind Carolyn and Herman and Karl-Heinz Sulwalt. After protesting the result, the Czepeks found themselves placed in an invidious position by the organisers, and they sportingly agreed to allow the result to stand. It was not a happy ending to an event that won't be fondly remembered by too many competitors. A great win for Carolyn, good fortune for the Sulwalts and Roscoe, and disappointment for the Czepeks. There was a gap of more than 5 hours between 4th and 5th, with Richard Schilling and Ashley Thorne and Seffi van Skalkwyk and Evert van Rensburg falling prey to mud and more mud.
It wasn't a race, it was a challenge.
What kept you going out there?
Well, you just had to keep going and just keep the car moving. As long as you could keep the car moving and stay out of serious trouble, you could get through. But there are certain sections that were virtually impossible. And that's why they had the sort of 5 guys coming through on the first lap out of I don't know how many, but it was just a joke.
There was also a gap of more than 5 hours at the top of the production vehicle leaderboard. All the crews behind the Nissan Sani pair of Neil Woolridge and Paul Vermaak were also mud victims. Second went to the Kutsia Leek Castrol Toyota ahead of the Frankenberg Yo Range Rover. At the end of it all, an intrepid biker had the final word.